My name is Daniel Reed, and for years, I carried my family on my back. I paid their bills, covered their debts, and made sure they never struggled. I thought that meant something. But then, at my mother's birthday dinner, an event I paid for down to the last candle, they laughed in my face. "To the best son in the family, me," my brother Ryan toasted. "And to Daniel, our biggest burden," my father added. Everyone laughed, and that was the moment I knew I was nothing to them. But they were about to learn what happens when a burden finally walks away. The laughter echoed in my ears long after I had left the dining room. I didn't storm out. I didn't cause a scene. I simply stood up, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the door. My mother's voice followed me, light and playful as if none of it mattered, as if it were all just a harmless joke. But it did matter. I stepped outside, and the cold night air hit me like a slap. It should have cleared my head, but instead, it only made the words replay louder. A burden. That was what I was to them. Not the son who had kept the house running. Not the man who had sacrificed his own life so they could live comfortably. Just a burden. I climbed into my truck and gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles turning white. I wasn't angry yet. Right now, I just felt empty. I had spent my whole life believing that if I worked hard enough, gave enough, proved myself enough, my parents would finally see me. That they would finally appreciate me the way they did Ryan. But that moment would never come, because they had already made their choice. They had chosen to believe Ryan's lies. They had chosen to paint me as some selfish man who only threw money at them out of obligation, not love. They had chosen to reward Ryan for his laziness while treating me like an afterthought. And tonight, they had shown me exactly where I stood. I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. The first call was to my landlord. I told him I would be moving out by the weekend. The second call was to my bank. I requested that every single one of my account details be changed immediately. Because as of this moment, my parents were no longer my responsibility. For the first time in years, my phone was silent. No calls about overdue bills. No texts about unexpected expenses. No voicemails from my mother reminding me that family takes care of each other. At first, it felt unnatural. The quiet. No one needed anything from me. No one was demanding my time or my money. I sat in my new apartment, surrounded by unopened boxes, staring at the blank walls. This was what I had wanted, wasn't it? To be free. Then why did it feel like I was waiting for something? The answer came the next morning. When I woke up, I saw my phone flashing with missed calls and messages. My mother had sent several, asking where I was and why I wasn't answering. My father's texts were shorter, telling me to stop acting ridiculous. Ryan had messaged too, calling me dramatic and asking why I was making such a big deal out of things. I ignored them all. Then, in the afternoon, my phone buzzed with a new notification. I glanced at the screen, expecting another message from my family. But it wasn't. It was a bank alert. There had been an unusual login attempt on my account. My stomach twisted as another notification popped up, a confirmation that my password had been changed. My hands tightened around the phone. I hadn't changed anything. Heart pounding, I called the bank immediately. A representative answered, their voice calm and professional as they asked if I had authorized the login attempt. I told them no. There was a pause. Then the representative explained that someone had tried to access my account from an unfamiliar location. When I confirmed that I hadn't changed my password, they informed me that my online banking had been locked for security reasons. I would need to visit a branch in person to reset everything. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. I already knew who was behind this. Ryan. It wasn't enough for him that I had been paying for everything our whole lives. Now that I had finally cut them off, he was trying to take what wasn't his. And the worst part? He actually thought he would get away with it. I sat there, my phone burning in my palm. My jaw clenched so tight it hurt. Ryan had actually done it. Not just tried to manipulate me, not just played his usual victim act. He had gone one step further. He had tried to steal from me, as if my money was still his for the taking. As if I had no right to my own life. As if I still belonged to them. But he was wrong. I grabbed my jacket, threw it over my shoulder, and walked out of my apartment. I wasn't going to text. I wasn't going to call. I was going to face them. Before I continue the story, I want to connect with all of you, my amazing viewers. Where are you watching from? Drop the flag of your country in the comments below. And now, let's continue. I drove through the dark, the familiar streets leading me back to the house I had once called home. But tonight, it didn't feel like home. It felt like enemy territory. As I pulled up, I saw the lights still on in the living room. I knew they were inside. I climbed the front steps and knocked 3 sharp, deliberate raps. No one answered at first, but I could see shadows shifting behind the curtains. They were in there. They were waiting. After a few moments, the door finally creaked open. Ryan stood there, arms crossed over his chest, leaning lazily against the frame as if he had expected this. His smirk was infuriating. "Oh, look who finally showed up," he said, voice dripping with amusement. "Took you long enough to realize you can't just walk away from family." I didn't respond. I pushed past him, stepping inside. My parents were in the living room. My mother had her phone in her hands, probably sending me another guilt-tripping message. My father sat in his chair, arms folded, sighing as if I was the one causing the problem. "Good," my father muttered, barely glancing at me. "You're finally done with this nonsense." I let out a dry laugh, shaking my head. "Nonsense," I repeated, my voice dangerously calm. "Do you have any idea what just happened to my bank account?" My mother lifted her head, feigning confusion, but I knew her well enough to see through it. She wasn't shocked. She already knew. Ryan shrugged, flopping onto the couch. "Oh, come on. Don't be so dramatic. You always overreact to everything." I clenched my fists. "You tried to steal from me." Ryan rolled his eyes. "Relax. I was just checking to see if you still planned on taking care of the family." I took a slow, deep breath, trying to keep my anger in check. "Checking? You think hacking into my bank account is just checking?" My mother suddenly spoke, her voice sharp and cold. "Daniel, don't act like a stranger to your own family. We have a right to know that you're okay." I laughed, a bitter, humorless sound. "Oh, really? You have the right to break into my personal accounts? That's how this works now." I turned to face all of them, my pulse pounding in my ears. Funny, when I was paying for everything, I was part of the family. But the moment I stop, I'm a problem. My father slammed his hand against the armrest of his chair, his voice firm. "We don't want to argue with you, Daniel, but you're acting like a child. Family takes care of each other. Blood is thicker than water." I met his gaze head-on. "Then tell me something, Dad. If blood is so important, why do you treat Ryan, who has never lifted a damn finger to help, as the golden child? And why do you call me, the one who has given you everything, a burden?" My mother's expression darkened as she stood up. "Watch your tone. We raised you. We took care of you. You owe us." Something inside me turned ice cold. I owe them. That was it. That was how they saw me. Not as a son. Not as part of a family. As a debt to be repaid. I nodded slowly, letting the realization settle. "I think I made a mistake coming here." I turned and walked toward the door. But just as I reached for the handle, Ryan's voice rang out behind me, taunting. "You'll be back," he said smugly. "You can't live without us. You've spent your whole life doing what other people wanted. You're too weak to do anything else." I stopped. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to. I simply said one sentence. "Watch me." Then I walked out. I shut that door behind me, not just on the house, but on my past. And this time I knew for sure I wasn't coming back. The drive back to my apartment felt different this time. It wasn't just distance I was putting between us. It was something deeper, something final. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just leaving them behind. I was freeing myself, but I also knew them too well to think it would end here. I had cut them off. I had shut that door. And now they were going to push back. At first, it was subtle. A text from my mother the next morning, pretending nothing had happened. "Let's have dinner this weekend. You can bring that favorite wine of yours." I didn't respond. A few hours later, another message. This time from my father. "Enough of this. Come home so we can talk like adults. I deleted it without reading the rest. Then came Ryan. Dude, stop being ridiculous. Just come over and we'll sort this out. No one's mad. We're family. I ignored him too. Then the messages changed. Mom, after everything we've done for you, this is how you treat us? Dad, fine. If you think you don't need us, we'll see how long that lasts. Ryan, you're making a huge mistake. Don't come crying to us when you realize it. I thought that would be the worst of it. I was wrong. It started with the feeling that I was being watched. At first, I chalked it up to paranoia. I'd leave work late and notice a car parked across the street from my building. A different car every night, always idling with its headlights off. It was subtle enough that I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Until one night, I left my apartment to grab some takeout, and as I turned the corner, I saw him. A man standing near the edge of the building, pretending to look at his phone. But the second I walked past him, he didn't move. He didn't scroll. And when I glanced at a nearby storefront window, I caught his reflection. He was watching me. I turned sharply. Hey! The man looked up, startled, then shoved his phone in his pocket and walked off without a word. That was when I knew. They had hired someone to follow me. The next morning, I checked my mother's messages again, and suddenly, one of them stood out. If you won't talk to us, we'll find another way. I gripped my phone so tightly I thought it might crack. This wasn't about concern. It wasn't about family. It was about control. I had left them and they couldn't stand it. They had taken my money for years, manipulated me into taking care of them, twisted every sacrifice I made until it was something ugly. And now that I had finally broken free, they were trying to reel me back in by force. I wasn't going to let that happen. So I did something I knew would draw them out. I sent a message to the family group chat. I know you hired someone to follow me. Stop now or I go to the police. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. It was my mother. I picked up. How dare you threaten us? She hissed, skipping any pretense of warmth. We're just worried about you. You left without a word, and now you're accusing us of spying on you. I clenched my jaw. Because that's exactly what you're doing. We just want to be sure you're safe, she snapped. But I see now you don't care about this family at all. I forced a laugh. That's funny, because I cared for this family every single day until I finally realized something. Realized what? She demanded. That you don't actually love me, I said, my voice steady. You just love what I can do for you. Silence. Then her voice dropped into an icy whisper. You think you're so smart, so independent. Who's going to cook for you? Who's going to wash your clothes? Who's going to clean up after you? You think you can live without us, but you'll see soon enough, you can't. I froze, not because she was right, but because, for the first time, I understood. Growing up, she had never let me take care of myself. If I tried to do laundry, she'd push me aside. You'll ruin your clothes. If I tried to cook, she'd snatch the knife from my hands. You'll cut yourself. If I tried to clean, she'd shake her head. You'll just make it worse. And over time, I had stopped trying. I had believed it was just her way of taking care of me. But now I saw the truth. It wasn't care. It was control. She had raised me to need her. And now that I had left, she refused to believe that I could survive without them. You'll regret this, Daniel, she said, her voice dripping with certainty. You can pretend all you want, but you will come crawling back. And when you do, don't expect us to welcome you with open arms. I exhaled slowly, and then I did something I never thought I would. I smiled. I haven't needed you for a long time. And I hung up. Then I called my bank. New accounts. New passwords. Everything changed. Next, I called a lawyer. I need to make sure my family has no access to me, my finances, or anything I own. I told him. Understood, he said. I'll draft a legal notice immediately. If they attempt to access anything of yours again, we'll take action. That was step 1. Step 2 was the police. I walked into the station, took a deep breath and said, I need to file a harassment report, because I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was fighting back. 6 months had passed since I last spoke to them. 6 months since I changed my bank accounts, filed a restraining order, and rebuilt my life without the minute. At first, the silence had been deafening. After years of constant demands, guilt trips, and manipulations, the quiet felt unnatural. But as time went on, I realized something. Peace wasn't just the absence of their voices. It was the presence of freedom. My mornings were no longer interrupted by desperate phone calls. My evenings weren't spent stressing over bills that weren't mine to pay. For the first time in years, my money belonged to me, my time was my own, and my future was mine to decide. Meanwhile, I knew things weren't going well for them. I hadn't reached out, but word still found its way to me. Ryan had finally been forced to get a job. But, predictably, it hadn't lasted long. 2 weeks in, he quit, complaining that working for other people just wasn't for him. My parents, without my financial support, had started falling behind on their mortgage. They had turned to other family members for help, but after years of using everyone around them, they found that no one was willing to bail them out. They had always believed I would come crawling back, that I needed them more than they needed me. But now they were realizing the truth. And that's when my phone rang. An unknown number. I stared at the screen, knowing exactly who it was before I even answered. I let it ring for a few seconds, then pressed accept and held the phone to my ear. "Daniel, honey?" My mother's voice came through, soft, almost hesitant. I leaned back in my chair, exhaling slowly. "Mom." She took that as encouragement. "It's been so long. I've been thinking about you. Your father and we've had a tough time lately. We miss you." I said nothing. She sighed. "Listen, let's not dwell on the past. Okay? We just want to see you. Can we have dinner? Just a simple meal. As a family. As a family. The same family that had drained me dry for years. The same family that had mocked me in front of a room full of people. The same family that had broken into my apartment, stalked me, and tried to steal from me. And now that they were struggling, now that they had no one else to turn to, suddenly they wanted to talk. I kept my voice calm. "I hope you're doing well, Mom." She latched onto the warmth in my tone, desperation creeping into her voice. "Oh, sweetheart. I knew you'd come around. But we have nothing to talk about." Silence. Then her tone shifted, turning sharp, almost accusing. "Daniel, don't be like this. We're still your parents. We raised you, we took care of you, and I paid you back for that 1,000 times over," I said evenly. "That's not the point," she snapped. "You're acting like you don't even care about us anymore." I let that sit between us for a moment before I spoke. "I don't think you understand, Mom. You didn't lose me 6 months ago. You lost me years ago." Her voice dropped to a cold whisper. "Fine, but don't expect us to be there when you need us." A small smile crossed my lips. "I haven't needed you for a long time." And with that, I hung up. I set my phone down and waited. Waited for the guilt, for the sadness, for the pain of severing the last remaining tie. But it never came, because this time I wasn't just cutting them off. I was finally letting them go. That night, I slept better than I had in years. The next morning, I woke up early, brewed myself a strong cup of coffee, and sat by the window, watching the sun rise over the city. My business was thriving. My life was moving forward. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what came next, because I finally understood something. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect. And if someone only values you for what you can give them, they're not family. They're just people you used to know. I finished my coffee, grabbed my keys, and stepped out the door. I had a life to live. And this time, I was never looking back. This story is about self-worth, boundaries, and the courage to walk away from toxic relationships. Family isn't about blood. It's about respect and support. Daniel didn't just cut them off. He reclaimed his life. What do you think? Drop a 2 if you liked it, a 7 if you didn't. And if you relate, share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Mr.HeartVibes for more powerful stories. Your support keeps these stories alive.